Welcome back to the Performance Bicycle Podcast. Bikes, beers, and burritos. We got our beers today. Got a nice little sip going. Sierra Nevada for me. I got a nice Oktoberfest, which is just about in season, so enjoying it.
That's really just about out of season.
I guess it is, huh?
Yeah, October 27th.
They don't do a Thanksgiving fest, though.
Celebration.
Oh, celebration.
Yeah, it is Selly season. Celebration is out on
Selly
tap
season.
right now. Yeah, that's wild. I feel like it was just summer. Maybe it's because we were just in Tahiti that it was like the weather was hot and warm and
boy, am I glad to be back though.
it is so much cooler now. And yeah, for more reasons than one, we're glad to be back.
But my name is Jeffrey. I am the host today again, and with us we have.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Jack.
And we're gonna cover a interesting topic today. The main topic of discussion is going to be the one bike to rule them all, or the quiver killer. Is it an actual thing? Jack, what do you think?
I haven't tested it myself yet, but I wouldn't be opposed to trying it one day.
The one bike to rule them all. Ryan?
Yeah, I think we hear about it all the time. Bikes, we've said it before, bikes are expensive, and you get a garage full of them. Sometimes you just get there's this inkling of this idea that, one bike maybe is my preferred bike anyway. So why would I own 2 and 3 and 4 if I could make that one do everything?
Have you attempted the one bike to rule them all?
I actually have attempted this before, yes. I had a bunch of bikes get stolen out of my garage and got some insurance money. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to the frame builder. Now's the time. Why would I go buy a bunch of bikes when I could buy one bike to rule them all?
Yeah, that's not even just buying, though. That's getting one custom built.
I was getting one
that's taking it to the next level right there.
Ultimate quiver killer.
Ultimate quiver killer. I think the thing with the one bike to rule them all is, we should preface a little bit. This is one drop handlebar bike to rule them all. The bike that you could use for riding on road.
No. We're talking downhill runs all the way to crit racing.
This is your commuter. This is your touring bike. No, this is going to be in one half of that spectrum.
This is covering drop bar specific bikes because, quite frankly, you can't ride single track on the same bike you race a crit on. So, yeah, drop bar bikes, gravel.
Depends who you ask, I guess.
Not if you want the bike to hold up.
Fair.
Yeah, it's all about that longevity. If you're spending your money, you don't want to be breaking stuff.
Well, we've said it before, like right now in this drop bar category, road bikes, gravel bikes, all that, I say it, the Venn diagram is super messy. You have this category of bike called all-road bike, which is kind of not clearly defined yet.
I feel like the all-road bike is kind of phasing out. It was around for a little bit. Same thing with the endurance bike category. Like, they're kind of dissipating.
They are, because there's so much overlap with then the gravel bike category.
Yeah.
Are there any specific unroad bikes out there yet?
The BWR bikes?
Unroad? The BWR bikes. I don't really think so. I mean, there's still those companies that are... No, I would say there's no unroad bikes. It's just that road bikes now have this massive clearance. I mean, most road bikes you can clear at least a 32.
Well, Jeff, what's your tarmac fit for tires right now?
I got 32s on it right now, the 32 Mondos, and it still has a little bit of clearance.
That's on the new SL8.
The new SL8, yeah. The SL8, SL7.
Yeah, there's room to spare in that, too.
There is. That's what I'm saying, is you could probably get some, 34s, 35s on there.
Yeah. And I think that's part of what's making this Venn diagram that much more messy. Like you said, is all-road even a thing? Well, if your tarmac clears 32s for riding in the off-season or maybe 34s, what's an all-road bike for? What's an endurance bike for? And the other side of this is you got a gravel bike. It'll fit narrow tires. Do you even need a road bike at all?
Always. Yeah, because you can't rail a descent like you can on a road bike, on a gravel bike, when it comes to pavement at least.
So really the issue then is more geometry.
As far as I'm concerned, yes. The geometry is everything whenever it comes to actually riding a bike.
So I guess the question on this all-road thing is, can it be done? And that almost is going to be user dependent, right? Of like, if you're the person who isn't out on crit courses on the weekend, you're not railing turns and descents, then maybe your gravel bike is your primary one bike to rule them all bike, and it's good enough on the road even though it's not ideal.
Yeah, I think it's important to decide what you're trying to make the bike do and pick the window you're trying to make it fit in, because it's pretty rare to have someone racing crits and doing like extreme adventure off-road gravel.
Totally.
I was like, you kind of got to shift it one way or the other, and you can usually get someone that's pretty close, I feel like.
See, up at the Cascade Gravel Grinder this last year, that stage 1 TT, I chose to ride the road bike. I threw some
Like you did.
32s on the road bike.
And how did that go?
I flatted. So not ideal, but it got the job done. After doing that, I don't think that was probably the fastest way to go though, because it was snowy, it was muddy. Bigger tires and a little bit more comfort would have been nice on that, even on that short little race.
Well, I think too, it seems to me like whether it's the industry selling us it or not, there's kind of a shift in this idea that wider tires are faster. We've seen that for years now, right? Like when I first started riding, it was on road, it was 700 by 23s. When you were first riding, it was 25s. Now we're all on 28s. And then they were saying if you're heavier, bigger, even wider and wider and wider. So, you know, between disc brake, well, I guess what makes all road or, a one bike to rule them all possible, some of the facets are disc brakes make it more viable than before, right? Or a thing you could consider, because that changes tire clearance. Where when we were on rim brake bikes before, you were limited to what that caliper could clear
That's true.
without switching brakes.
Yeah, because road bikes had the caliper brake. If you had a cross bike because back then gravel bikes were not a thing. There was a cross bike potentially. You had canties, but again, a cross bike wasn't necessarily a road bike or a gravel bike. I mean, see, now there's just so many different categories because there still are cross bikes, and the lines are slowly getting blurred. But there's gravel, there's cross, there's road, there's unroad, there's anything you could possibly imagine. Is it just a ploy to get people to buy more bikes?
In some ways, I think it could be. We've talked about this a little bit as it pertains to gravel, right? Having come up as a roadie, the gearing on my bike stayed the same. The tires that I liked, no matter what race we were doing, pretty much stayed the same. The bike didn't get much tuning for race day specifically. Now, Jeffrey, you've got that background coming from the world of cross-country racing, on the mountain bike, high school racing, and you guys were kind of tuning your bikes to the course to a degree, right?
Yeah, we were changing tires going into races depending on if it was going to be, we could go a little bit lighter casing just to drop some weight, if it wasn't going to be a course where you might puncture. You were trying to do everything to gain the slightest advantage.
I mean, to the degree that maybe, where you get into the suspension, air pressure, handlebar width, any of that kind of stuff?
Not so much changing handlebar width pertaining to the race, but there were various things. I mean, suspension, unless you really went up in elevation, I ran it the same every time. I was into the tech back then, but not really into the tech. I was more just out there to smash the pedals.
Well, and you're a high school kid. You only had
Yeah.
so much budget to exactly. Mountain bike too. It wasn't like you had a pro mechanic there just swapping everything out for you. I guess with that, what I'm getting at is the gravel, to me, and this is what we've discussed, feels closer to cross-country mountain biking in the equipment, that you do tend to choose your equipment for the course a bit more. You're maybe, what we often see, I would say it's less about the exact correct tread and more about how wide of a tire should I run today, seems to be the question that a lot of people are running.
I think the casing of the tire does come into play there too. I've seen, like, the Pathfinder is a very popular tire.
Right.
We see it all over the place, and they have the Pro version and they have the S-Works version. I would highly recommend anyone who is riding somewhere where you could potentially puncture, get a pinch flat, anything like that, you go with the Pro. The little bit of extra weight is worth the extra durability.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, that makes sense. But with all that, if we're swapping tires for the race, making sure that the width is correct, you've got, the right amount of tread, you've got a casing that makes sense. We're also seeing at the highest level in gravel right now, highest level in U.S. gravel, this Lifetime Grand Prix, really unique setups coming down from those pro riders where you've got maybe mullet builds, but the mullet that we see now under a rider like Keegan is totally different than the mullet we saw when SRAM first got going. The size of the front chainring is it's ridiculous.
I still want to know how they do that. Like, he threw a 40 on his cross-country bike for Leadville. Like,
right.
Yeah, we need the secrets on that one.
Exactly. The frame clearance, according to manufacturer specs, is like a 36.
Yeah, that's not we're not like slightly bigger. We're a lot bigger.
The Giant Revolt has a max clearance of a 38.
Yep.
That's insane. A
Yeah.
gravel bike with a 38 max tooth in the front.
So I guess staying on topic here, then this one bike to rule them all, you're going to have to, if you want one bike to rule them all, really be thoughtful about what you want to do. And then you need to be thoughtful about what bike you pick. The Revolt's a prime example. If it truly can only fit a 38 tooth chainring, are you willing to use a double, a 2x in the front, 2 chain rings and a front derailleur? Or if you're dead set on going 1x, which I feel like the Quiver Killer one bike to rule them all is probably a 1x bike, is a 38 going to do it for your purposes?
But is the Quiver Killer a 1x bike?
That's
That's
a
the
really good segue
real
right there.
real question.
That is a great segue.
So, if you were to choose a one Quiver Killer to do the majority of your drop bar riding, what would you choose?
I would have a front derailleur on it.
Yeah, I would agree. Just because I feel like we also lean a bit more road riding too, where
Absolutely.
front derailleurs, it hopefully sticks around on the road. I hope the issue doesn't kick it off on the road bikes as well. But I think you almost need a front derailleur if you're really going to compete on the roads, and even for like your local group rides and stuff, being able to stay up to the front of those groups.
See, whenever it comes to actual racing, I'm not sure there is going to be a one bike Quiver Killer. Because if you're trying to race, you're trying to maximize everything for that discipline. And if you're on the road, you're going to want full-on road gearing. You're going to want a light aero bike more than likely. And then on the gravel, you're going to want the tire clearance of a gravel bike. Whether you can clear big tires on your road bike or not, it's important to have the mud clearance. Because this
Right.
year we've had a couple gravel races where you go through this like peanut butter mud that just cakes up on your bike.
Right.
And even on a gravel bike for Huffmaster, I had 45s and I had tons of clearance around them. You got to points in the course where you couldn't push your bike next to you because it was so caked with mud.
Yeah.
But
It
how
was-
much clearance would you have needed? Like, are you screwed either way?
For
Once
something
that
like
muddy?
that,
Yeah.
I think you would have wanted a gravel bike with like 32s. So you just have a ton of clearance because there was a lot of paved stuff there. And that's,
Fair enough.
once again, that gets back to your point of like, it's very tailored to where you're going,
Yeah.
what you're trying to do.
And we weren't there, but we also know Unbound this year was a mud fest as well. And I saw, and I'm sure a lot of you all saw, horror story pictures of people who'd wore through like their chain stays or their fork because of, like you said, if you only had so much clearance, even if you had a lot of clearance, once the mud packs up in there, it starts wearing down the material. So yeah, I think playing with tires and having the optimized equipment for the race is a really good perspective and a good point that if you are looking for the Quiver Killer bike, but you're also a competitor, it's going to be tougher. Other side of that coin, though, is what if you're not a competitor?
Right.
What if you like going and doing events? Your idea of going to a gravel grinder is challenging yourself. It's the accomplishment of finishing. It's going out with your buddies and doing a fun event. Is the Quiver Killer, is the one bike to rule them all, more viable for that rider?
I think that's the one type of rider that it is viable for. If you are just trying to go to an event and enjoy it, you're okay with maybe a little bit of extra weight. If you're going to a gravel event, I mean, if you have a gravel bike, you're not going to be overgunned.
Right.
If you go to, say, a Gran Fondo, you don't care if you're losing 10 seconds, 20 seconds here on a climb or something like that. So it's more than you definitely would rather go towards the gravel bike route, I would think, if you're trying to do the one bike to rule them all.
Yeah, so the question there, I was thinking of, like, how much clearance on your road bike would you need?
Yeah.
Like, what would you consider to be able to go do most gravel rides? What would you need to clear on your road bike to be able to cover that spectrum of riding?
Again, it's just like, I don't know that these are questions you can fully answer.
Well, what would you say? Like, what could
See,
you
well,
ride most gravel rides on?
I think I've got an answer to that. It seems to me like the most common gravel dedicated tire width at this point is somewhere straddling the fence between a 38 and a 40 millimeter. That is like the number that is going to come stock on bikes OEM. That's what people default to. You're going to see guys go wider for certain courses and narrower for others, but it seems to center around kind of 38, 40. So if you're double purposing your bike, you'd need a road bike that probably can clear at least a 40. Don't worry about the 45s and mud clearance. Just like, can you fit a 40 in there? I think that'd be the...
You're not going to find a road bike that clears a 40.
I got one right here.
Ah,
You gotta get it
That's
custom
the one
made.
bike to rule them all.
how did that work out for you?
So yeah, but you asked that question earlier. I have tried doing the one bike to rule them all with this custom frame. And again, Jack mentioned it, I'm more road leaning, road racer. So I was like, man, I'm so comfy on my road bike. I've always found even under biking on the road bike off road that the geometry didn't bother me that much. If that's the bike I put all the miles on, that's the one I want to use. So I initially set it up with the Campy Ecker group so I could run it one by, and had 13 speeds in the back. It's got a little baby 9-tooth cog, so you have pretty high gears. And it was just, the jumps and the shifting with the 13 speed were okay on flatter group rides. It wasn't as bad as I was expecting it was going to be, but keeping that thing aligned with all those gears was tough. And then I would run out of a high gear in more instances like a pedally descent or a really big tailwind.
What's the size of the chain you had on the front?
That one, I was running a 44-tooth chainring with a 9 to 42 in the back.
So a 44.9.
Mm-hmm. Which is a pretty tall gear. It's close to a compact, like a 5011. It's a little under, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to look. I can actually check on a gear calculator. But aside from the gearing, the other challenges I ran into was it really is road geometry. And so if you put wide tires on and you went to ride off-road, it was wide. It fit those tires, but it didn't fit them with healthy clearance. So if you had anything mucky or dirty, you were like, ugh, feel like I'm wrecking my bike. And then, yeah, like I like underbiking just like we all do on the road bike off-road. But my underbiking's never as fast as riding the right bike for the job. So if you go to like some gravel thing, it's like the bike can do it, but I wasn't doing it quickly.
So you did get a custom steel bike built. Steel's real.
Steel is real.
But if it was carbon, do you think it would have felt different or made it a little bit more lively? Do you think that would have changed anything?
That might have changed some of it too. Yeah, coming from, plastic bikes, race bikes, carbon race bikes that feel really snappy or really light. This was not that. And the bonus is over the course of a long day, this bike is super, super comfy. It's really plush. It feels great. But when you want to stand up and get out of the saddle, which, arguably doesn't happen that often in a gravel event or something, it just doesn't have that same get up and go. It just wasn't quite as lively. So again, in the purpose of thinking through competition, you're like, yeah, this is not the ideal setup. But if you're riding to ride and you like steel, I don't think it would have bothered you so much. People get all into, all sorts of stuff with steel actually being better riding off-road with, harmonic vibrations.
Fake news.
Yeah, fake news. Go talk to the guys at Renee Hurst about that. They're really into it, all the randonnée style approach. Steel and flexi is better and whatever else. The industry pushes the opposite. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess, maybe the question we're asking or a question to ask here is, what are the bikes that we think would be, or what are the product, what frames and what do you hang off those frames? My mind, when we talk kind of the one bike to rule them all and something all road, is a less progressive gravel bike. Progressive meaning it's more slacked out. It's more for aggressive, gnarlier gravel riding. It has massive tire clearance. It's starting to really blur the line between a drop handlebar bike and a mountain bike. So a less progressive bike, something like an Open, that kind of comes to mind for me. Maybe something like a 3T or
Even the Crux.
a specialized
that's
Crux.
what I've seen the most people use is the Crux.
Yeah, I'm running that right now, and I didn't realize
As your gravel bike.
as my gravel bike, and I didn't realize how, I guess, road bike-esque it is off-road until after I rode the Diverge STR and realized how progressive and comfy that is off-road compared to the Crux, where it's just like you're getting banged around.
Right.
But it's still a very, very comfortable and capable bike. You just have to ride it more like a road bike than a full-on gravel bike.
So then there's a question. Jeffrey, you're riding a Crux. How do you have it set up?
I have 38 Pathfinders on it.
Okay.
And it's got a 1x axis group on it but it's not a mullet group. It is the Explorer.
Access Explorer.
So
So a
it's
little
got-
bit less range in the rear.
Got the 1044 in the back. It's got a 42 on the front. And if I were to try and use that as my quiver killer, it's undergeared on the road. So I think you can definitely change something like
you
that.
don't have a high enough gear.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It definitely doesn't have that top end whenever you get over probably mid 30s or so, 30 miles an hour, you're going to be spun out. And I think you could definitely change the bike up to make it more of a one bike to rule them all. That's not what I've been going for.
Sure.
If I were, I think I would go 2x. I would throw a front derailleur on the front. With the SRAM gearing, you can have a 46-33, I believe it is, in the front,
Okay.
which with that 10 is basically going to give you a 50-11 gearing,
Oh wow. That's
which
real road gearing.
is road gearing completely. And then you could still have an Explorer cassette on the back, which would be so you'd have a 33-44. And that's more than you would need off
So
road.
you'd have some super low undergeared stuff, which we're seeing a lot more of that in progressive gravel bikes.
Which I think then you would also need a second wheel set.
That's my big thing. Is the second wheel set is a game changer because that Explorer, you can keep the Explorer derailleur on there, and it goes up to the 44 max. So you can use that as your gravel cassette, and then have a different cassette on your road wheels, and have those super normal road gears. Then,
Yeah, because the cassette goes down, I think down to like a 34. So you could have just a regular road cassette up to a 34 on the back, on road wheels, and then you basically have a road bike.
Well, and then I mean it's probably implied, but also there would be different tires you'd put
Absolutely.
on those wheels, right? That's where you'd go
And-
maybe down from your 38s to
because there's no way you're changing tires every week, twice a week. Like,
not a chance.
yeah,
Not tubeless.
People
Yeah.
should know that too for this one bike to rule them all thing. In theory, yes, you can swap tires on the same wheel set, but now that pretty much everything is tubeless, you keep a compressor at home, you keep sealant at home, you've got injectors, you've got all the best stuff to make tubeless easy. It's still a job, it's still a messy job, it's still a chore, and I can nearly guarantee that if you're putting any sort of volume on the bike, like Jack said, you're not changing
No, there's
tires
no way.
2 times a week.
no matter what you tell yourself now, you're not doing it. It's not going to happen.
At the end of the day, all you want to do is ride.
Right.
Yeah, that's
So
why we
I've
do
thought about this. Like, no more than like a 5-minute, 10-minute session in the garage. You get it from switch to road bike to gravel bike would be like my max.
That's got
Takes more than that. Like,
See, sometimes I'll think about it and be like, oh, it's just a quick tire swap. And I'll get into it and it will end up, I'll hit some hiccup and it'll end up being an hour-long like
For
job.
some reason, this time the tire just
Yep, and
didn't
then you're
seal that quickly.
walking into the bike shop, tail between your legs. Just,
Yeah.
oh, guys, I need some
Or
help with this
it's
one.
10 p.m. You're trying to do it for your
Yep.
ride the next day, and you don't get to go because, or you got to go do it on the setup you didn't want to do it on. Yeah, it's
Been there far too many times.
for the quiver killer. A necessity of the quiver killer is 2 sets of wheels.
Absolutely.
Something that's more road setup and something that's more gravel setup.
And then both of you said front derailleur, right? So I think it's
I
like
said front derailleur, yeah.
you get a front derailleur, so you have the 2x gearing because you're going to be just as capable on the road and off the road. And at this point, front derailleurs are pretty good. Love them or hate them, they don't drop chains that much anymore.
No.
They're doing a pretty good job.
When I also would say that you probably should be looking at a gravel specific group for your one bike to rule them all. In that you want to probably get the gear range that SRAM's Explore gear range offers. The road gearing you can totally use on an Explore derailleur, but you cannot use the Explore gearing
Correct.
on the road derailleur. So you get the bonus of just the capacity of gear range there. And then on the Shimano side of things, of course, the newest level of GRX, you've got clutched derailleur as well. Both sides are claimed to have clutched derailleurs. We have our
Claimed.
I'll emphasize claimed, but you get a clutched derailleur, you get a really good front derailleur on Shimano also. But I probably wouldn't be doing this with for example, an Ultegra group. I don't think that's the right call. Even if you wanted to go 2x, you can't necessarily get low enough gears. You don't have any clutch.
'Cause you're clearing 36 maybe in the back.
At best.
Yeah,
at
that's the
best.
max.
Yeah, that's
30,
tough.
maybe even a 34. Yeah, it's not very good.
So even if you want to do this on the road, you need a gravel group.
Yes. Gravel or with the mullet, there is the option of the 1x. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so hard. I think it all comes down to you deciding to begin with, what is your intended purpose of this one bike?
Mm-hmm.
If your intended purpose is racing gravel, I think you can go one by and use the bike to train on the road.
Right. It's your winter bike.
Yeah, exactly. You could do the majority of your riding on it so that you're comfortable with it, because you can train on it all the time, no matter what you're going out to do.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you may be undergeared on some descents or something, but whenever it comes to actual racing, you're going to be well off.
For sure. So it's a matter of, if you're the listener out there and you're debating, man, I really want to throw down, like, I'm going to spend a whole nest egg, life savings is going into one bike. What bike do I get? These are just kind of the tips trying to get you there for like what makes most sense. You need to have a little, talk with yourself and be real. How am I going to do this? I think at the end of the day, no matter who you are and how well you do, you're going to end up having a compromise somewhere. This bike will not be perfect at everything. It cannot be perfect at everything. So you need to decide, are you more road leaning? Are you more gravel leaning? Are you more gravel adventure leaning within that? Are you more road race leaning? Like, where are you on this spectrum? And once you settle in on that you got to be real with yourself. Like 90% of the time you do this kind of thing, then make sure your bike's really good at that.
Right.
And then you have to understand where you excel when it comes to riding also. Because if you're a very technically inclined rider, maybe you can underbike a little bit and get away with it. If you come from a mountain bike background or something and are really good at controlling your bike, you can underbike that.
100%.
No problem. But maybe if you're new to riding or something and you're not used to riding technical terrain, you're going to want a progressive bike. Even if you're not riding like terrain that requires a progressive bike the majority of the time, you want to make sure that you're safe for that little bit of time that you do need it.
100%. Yeah. I've heard so many stories of people that are more road leaning being really intimidated by gravel. They want to get into gravel. They want to try gravel. If that's the story you have, which is totally fine, a less progressive bike is not going to be viable for you. You're not going to enjoy yourself out there, and it's supposed to be fun.
Right.
So make sure you don't, build in those margins and be real with yourself about what you need. Back to like the bike I tried to build, one of the challenges I faced was I wanted this to be really good at road. And when I had the one by on it, it wasn't as good at road. So for me and my purposes, like 95% of my rides were road type rides. I built this bike trying to do everything, and it couldn't. It was, I would have had to have been willing to compromise on the road experience in order to make it capable of everything. But if 95% of my time's on the road, that makes no sense.
Right.
So you're going to have to be really honest with yourself. Maybe you need to talk to somebody else too and let them bring
Totally.
you back down to earth. That might be a good tip. And don't just look at the pictures of what the pros are riding, because Jeff made the really good point. The pros have the access to all the equipment. They're building stuff that is course specific. What they use is not what you need necessarily.
Well, it's not what they're training on every day either.
No, they have the exact opposite. They're never going to use the one bike to roll them all. They've got all the bikes in the garage. So what they have for that course and what they are running is probably the exact opposite of what you want for a one bike to rule them all. So like we see a ton of one by, but you hear us saying two by. That's because the one by that we see is race specific for gravel. And if you're doing a quiver killer, one by's just not quite, you just miss out on the high end gearing, or you miss out on the low end gearing, or you miss out on the gear steps. You do a flat group ride, you're going to be hating that every shift feels like you shifted 3 times.
Right.
Yeah. So I think we've covered a lot of it, but saying we have a new rider coming into the sport, they want to get into it, they see all this gravel stuff, they maybe already have a cheaper road bike that they've done some Grand Fondos or some weekend cruises on. They want the one bike to rule them all. What would you recommend to them, Ryan?
I think, like kind of we mentioned earlier, there's a few bike brands that do a less progressive geometry bike. Sorry, did you say this person's going to do gravel events, or
They probably will, yeah.
primarily? I feel like there's a few people even in town that I've seen that they go buy a pretty, what I would consider at this point an average progressive gravel bike, like kind of the middle of the road, not the most slacked out, not the most upright. They buy a pretty middle of the road gravel bike, and they use that almost stock setup to do everything. And I think if I was the average guy just getting into it, that's what I'd be doing too. I think
that's another question too is, do you buy the complete bike and then swap parts around, or do you buy a frame and build it up exactly how you want it from the start? I did the math. It's pretty dang close on just buying a frame and keeping almost just the wheels and swapping everything else out to make it the one bike to rule them all, or just going full frame up build.
For that, I think it depends on how technically inclined you are, because that will involve you having to do a frame up build. If you are getting a shop to do it, it's going to be expensive.
No doubt.
It's not cheap to do that.
Yeah, but if you even buy the complete and you still want to swap parts, the shop's still going to have to swap it for you.
Yeah, fair point.
So does anyone offer like an OEM setup right now that kind of satisfies this? And I think the bike industry doesn't want you to have one bike to a mile. So I don't think they do. I don't think it currently is off the shelf ready to go.
They want you always to want to buy one more bike.
They do.
N+1.
Well, and I mean, I feel like if we were to settle in on one group set, most all of us here, I think, would agree, correct me if I'm wrong, SRAM, Axis, Explorer. Would that be with a double?
Simply for... That would be my choice.
You only need it for the rear derailleur, though. Because you don't need
Axis?
it. Yeah. Because you can run whatever chainring and cranks you want on the front. They don't have to be at least it would have to be the wide.
It'd have to be the wide, yeah. For tire clearance, the crank width.
Depending on the size of chainring you want to run.
Or chain rings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Because in the cassette, you can still run the rival road or road cassette in the rear, and then obviously the shifters are all same category. There's no difference there.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is there a gravel bike out there that comes set up with, it would probably come with Axis Explorer 2x. Is there one out there that has that setup?
None of the Explorer derailleurs are technically compatible with a front derailleur.
Right.
They're all 1x specific systems.
Which that I don't understand.
So when you buy a front derailleur from SRAM to do this, you're buying, they don't make an Explorer series front derailleur. It doesn't exist.
I mean, it shouldn't be any different, right? There's no clutch on a front derailleur. All it does is drop your chain and pick it back up.
Yeah, so it has more to do with that rear derailleur. So then is the group set we're building something not endorsed by SRAM?
Not at all.
Ah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. No, they claim all Explorer stuff is 1x specific.
So if someone really is going to be legalistic about what the brands say you can and can't do, are they left for what we're talking about looking at GRX?
GRX, does the new stuff have 2x?
Mm-hmm.
It
There's
does.
a 2x option in the newest GRX.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Di2 yet. But
I would not even consider it after running electronic group sets to go back to mechanical.
So that's a good one to bring up in here, and maybe part of the reason I was mentioning Axis is we were talking about it earlier today. If you ride in the dirt, the Axis or just electric shifting derailleurs are phenomenal, mostly because once you start to pack in dirt and mud and dust and grime, they keep shifting, and cables don't. At the end of the day, there's just no getting around that you will, in adverse conditions, your shifting degrades dramatically quicker on a traditional mechanical group set than an electronic one. So then that leaves us with really two brands making electronic shifting for off-road purposes, but one brand hasn't released it yet. The Di2, Shimano's GRX, they've done Di2 in their 11-speed, the prior generation. They just released a new generation 12-speed, but they've only released the mechanical. So we know there's probably a Di2 coming. You just can't get it yet. I was also thinking, though, on the Axis side, we've talked a lot about, with this one bike to all, the interchangeability. So if you want this quiver killer, and say 90% of the time all you have to do is swap wheels, but every once in a while you want to do a more dramatic swap, Axis is the most versatile for doing that.
So because you can't technically do 2x on it, if you really wanted to, you could just have a road derailleur also. Because
Nope.
it's
Not
so
doing
easy.
it. I'm
You
not
could
doing it.
Drop a
Nope.
road derailleur on there, throw on the front derailleur.
Is it though? That's
Exactly.
going to take
You
more
will
than 10
have a
minutes.
road bike.
It's going to take more than 10 minutes, and I'm not
Will
doing
it?
it.
It's one bolt.
And then you got to get it aligned every time. You got to use that plastic
Are you
thing.
talking about changing the derailleur?
Yeah.
No.
One bolt plus taking the chain off.
Yeah.
Putting the chain
Well,
back on.
That's so simple.
This is I want
It's
to turn this.
also
If you were to
simple.
run the 44 tooth on your gravel wheels and the
Yes.
30, would you have to switch a chain as well every time?
Possibly.
Depended what you went down to.
What do you mean?
On the front.
Yeah. No. To your road cassette.
To the 36.
To the 36.
Because you're running. Say you're running the Rival Explorer derailleur.
I bet if you cut the chain to the length of the 44, it probably works on the 36 without having to shorten it.
It's even easier then. You're just swapping wheels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what we were talking about, this claimed clutch on SRAM's mountain bike product, the clutch that they use in there is incredibly stiff and strong and works really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
When they launched the most recent generations of their road product for Axis, the electronic shifting, all these derailleurs have their orbital clutch. That orbital clutch, I think, is trying to use hydraulic fluid in the B-knuckle, the clutch mechanism, instead of a mechanical clutch with a spring that's been done traditionally. What we've found with those orbital clutches is they're just not anywhere close to as strong as the mechanical ones. They aren't nearly as stiff, and you drop chains still.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the Axis Explorer and the regular Axis Road stuff are using the same clutch.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, then, if you're running 2x, is the ultimate gravel group for one bike to rule them all actually a road group? Have we changed our tune? Are we going?
Oh.
No. We're
Well,
going
no,
back
because
to
you
mullet.
you
to
can't
mullet
clear
group.
your 44.
You can't clear the
cassette
44,
then.
so you still have to have the Axis rear derailleur. And we're just running it against SRAM's wishes with a front derailleur.
Unless you think that a 36 in the back and a 33 in the front would be viable.
For gravel?
Yeah.
You're already undergeared by a few teeth at that point.
Yeah.
So I think for hard courses, I think 1-to-1 is kind of the bare minimum for anyone. If you had a 33 with a 33, you'd be okay. But just a little extra, one more shift is kind of nice to be a little undergeared. So I think a 33, 36 gets you that.
I think for an entry-level rider, you would want much lower.
Yeah, maybe.
I know running a 42 on the front last year with a mullet setup on that STR, some of those courses, granted, they were some pretty brutal off-road courses with some steep sections.
But that happens.
I was in that 52 or 50 on the back with a
regularly.
42.
Yeah.
That's a drop 8.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. But again, we're trying to get somebody one bike that can do everything. If you knew that was the lowest you can do, and this is the right setup, generally speaking, for you,
Then you chose poorly.
you chose poorly. So somebody's got some good athletic background. They've got some serious chops for riding. They're going to be an accomplished rider, but they're new to it. 36 in the back with a 33 in the front going to do the trick?
Are they intending to try and race? Like race? Or are they
Someday.
going to...
Not yet,
Right
not
now,
yet.
they're just completing races.
But they are going to continue to have the same bike for a while.
They're probably going to have this a while, yeah.
You go mullet.
You go mullet. So that is back to the
Well, then again, if you're truly new to the sport, big gear steps, you don't know any different.
That's true. That's a good
Yeah,
point.
no problem. Your knees will...
So then,
Fine.
didn't you go straight to the transmission derailleur in the back?
100%.
That helps you pick your bike because there's only a few
That's
that
true.
offer UDH compatibility. I guess, too, with this, I hope this is enlightening for everyone listening or watching. It's hard to do this.
Extremely hard.
We came in, I think, with some ideas. We wanted to have free-form conversation on this, and we've all spent hours before talking about this, debating how do you do it, what would you do, and then we start thinking about it, and it is really freaking hard to pull off.
Yeah. It's not something that you're going to be settling on, I don't think.
You have to compromise somewhere.
Yes. So it all comes down to that, is you have to compromise. So you really got to just analyze what you're doing and pick based on that.
Yeah.
I think part of it too could be if you're someone who's always wanting your bike never feels quite right, it might not be the move for you. Just pick one bike, save up for another year or two, and get the other bike, and
That's
then you
a good
have
point.
both. Because if it's going to be unhappy the whole time, it's probably not worth doing it.
This might be the laziest perspective on that ever, but one reason, especially after my failed attempt at one bike to rule them all, that I really started to appreciate dedicated bikes is the bikes are ready to go. You end up setting them up the way you use them most of the time, and you're not having to change between. And there's something to be said, especially if you train regularly, you're riding regularly, you have limited hours to be on the bike, to know that you can go out to the garage and your road bike's a road bike. What about the person who doesn't do a lot of gravel events, doesn't do a lot of road events?
What's the ability to do it?
Or maybe doesn't do events.
I think it's for that person.
The one bike to rule them all.
Yeah. Like think
Because
some
their
guy
bike
around-
needs to be good enough to do all the rides they want to do. They don't really care about performance or winning the race or whatever. It's good enough to get them up and down the hill through that segment of dirt or whatever. And they're not going for the KOM. They're not going for this or that. They're just trying to get big rides done or whatever it is. Or all their training rides done. It's probably more for that person.
Like go out on an adventure with their buddies on the weekend.
that
type
same
of thing.
person that the Garmin watch is for.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah,
a
pretty
runner.
close.
They're an athlete, but bike is just one of their hobbies. Yeah, maybe they're going to enter a triathlon someday. Can you use your gravel bike at a triathlon? Absolutely. Why not? Yeah, they're going to maybe try riding it to work a little bit. Is this bike going to work for that? Sure. Somebody invites them on a group ride. They can go do it, but it doesn't mean they're doing it every week. Maybe that kind of person who's just like active and they're getting into bikes. I feel like bikes are, especially gravel bikes, are kind of trendy. I mean, you got that buddy who bought that Canyon and it's not like he's trying to become a pro gravel racer. He's just a runner or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And he's just diverse in it.
And that's where we kind of nerd out on the bikes. Like
We do.
we completely nerd out on them. And frankly, we overthink all of it too.
Oh, yeah.
So easy.
Whereas some of the majority of people that ride bikes probably could care less if you're lagging a little bit here and there.
Most of that stuff doesn't really matter. Like if you want to go one bike for the simplicity and you have the big gear jumps on the road, and then if that's all you know, that's all you know, and you're not going to complain about it. You're saying as long as you're as fast as your friend or the group you ride with, that's as fast as you need to be because you're not going to leave them behind ever. So people getting into racing, it gets much harder to have that one bike to rule them all and be satisfied in every discipline they're going to do.
So if you're not already a huge bike enthusiast, you don't consider cycling, bike riding, that's not how you identify. That's not your main hobby. That's not your one sport. That's not the one thing you do. You run, you hike, you have other activities you like to do that you spend a lot of time doing, and biking is one more in that list. The one bike to rule them all, especially if it's a gravel bike, is incredibly viable.
It's the way to go.
It's the way to go. Yeah. Yeah. It's when you're going to get to a point, if you get really into it as that type of rider, where you might start recognizing these compromises that we've been talking about. And that's where you may have to invest in another bike.
And that's where the one bike to rule them all thing is kind of your entry into cycling. And
yes.
then once you get into cycling and maybe you start to realize what you enjoy more, you can then go from there and pick multiple bikes for each discipline or so.
Yeah.
It's just that the
Or
one
you
bike to rule
sell
them
the one
all.
big to rule them all and then buy a road bike because
Yeah.
you ride the
Decide
road
you're
95%
only
of the
riding
time.
alone. Yep.
Yeah. So I we kind of summed it all up, I think, today.
I think so.
We had a good little conversation.
I mean, like to put it in like a sentence, like the consensus is one bike to rule them all is totally viable and works for somebody who isn't the enthusiast, and this isn't that they maybe are more novice and new to the sport and new to riding. That is who one bike to rule them all is for. So do not fall into the trap if you're an enthusiast and you've got a quiver of bikes in the garage already of trying to replace them with one bike. We don't think you're going to enjoy it. It's not going to be as fun.
It's not for everyone.
That was like 3 sentences or 4, but you know.
No big deal. So I think that about wraps up this episode.
Yeah, give
Thank
us
you
the
guys
tune,
for
Jack.
listening. Yeah.
Live studio audience today.
Yes, it is. All right. Catch us on the next one. Thanks for watching Bikes, Beers, and Burritos.